The wilderness is a realm of breathtaking beauty, but it also harbors hidden dangers. Grizzly bears, with their immense power and unpredictable behavior, can turn a peaceful hike into a life-threatening encounter in an instant. In this video, we will explore the harrowing realities of human-bear interactions, showcasing 6 stories where individuals face the terrifying might of these magnificent creatures. From survival competitions gone wrong to solo fishing trips that took a deadly turn, join us as we recount these chilling tales of bear attacks on humans and the lessons learned from each encounter. Amur Oblast, Russia, 2018. The vast wilderness of Amur Oblast had long been known for its unforgiving terrain and dangerous wildlife. Local hunters had passed down stories for generations about the massive grizzly bears that roamed these forests, territorial beasts that could weigh over 1,000 pounds. This fierce reputation attracted the producers of a popular survival competition show to film their newest season in the remote Russian wilderness, promising viewers the ultimate test of human endurance against nature's harshest elements. Thaddeus Blackwood, the show's ambitious executive producer, had insisted on pushing the contestants further than ever before. The 9 participants, ranging from former military personnel to wilderness experts, were carefully selected for their survival skills and camera-friendly personalities. Among them was Zara Thornfield, a former Olympic biathlete who had expressed concern about filming in bear territory without proper wildlife experts present. The production team established a base camp near a river known for its dramatic views and challenging environment. On the morning of the incident, Thornfield noticed fresh bear tracks near the camp. Her concerns, however, were downplayed by Blackwood, who reportedly considered such encounters valuable for the show's dramatic appeal. Although the safety protocols, questioned by local guides, recommended bear bells and spray, contestants were not allowed to carry firearms as part of the challenge. By the 3rd day of filming, the contestants were divided into 3 teams, competing to gather food and build shelters. That morning, Merrick Holloway, the show's survival expert, demonstrated proper food storage techniques and emphasized the importance of separating cooking areas from sleeping quarters. Unfortunately, as the teams raced to complete their tasks before nightfall, these precautions were not consistently followed. As the sun set on June 17th, the exhausted contestants gathered around a communal fire to prepare their meals. Kasumi Watanabe, the team's medical expert, was tending to Orion Patel's injured hands when warning signs emerged. Birds suddenly took flight, and an eerie silence fell over the forest. Moments later, a massive grizzly bear, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh around 980 pounds, emerged from the underbrush, likely attracted by the scent of cooked fish and dried meat. The animal charged at Dominique Lafleur, a mountaineer who was standing closest to the tree line. Attempting to retreat, Lafleur tripped over filming equipment and fell into the bear's path. The bear struck him, its claws tearing through his protective jacket and inflicting serious injuries. Chaos broke out as the contestants fled in different directions. Xavier Quintana, a former Special Forces member, tried to rally the others to group together and appear larger to deter the bear. However, panic had already spread. Thornfield managed to retrieve her bear spray, but the bear had already turned its attention to Anastasia Kuznetsov, the team's youngest member, who stood frozen in fear. The bear knocked Kuznetsov to the ground with alarming ease, standing over her as the camera operator, disregarding all established safety procedures, continued to record the unfolding incident. Acting swiftly, Holloway seized a flaming branch from the fire and rushed toward the bear, waving it aggressively and shouting to divert the animal's attention. The distraction created a critical opening, allowing Thornfield to use her bear spray at close range, discharging it directly into the bear's face. The bear, temporarily blinded and disoriented by the spray, reared back on its hind legs before charging in a new direction, this time toward Blackwood, who had been attempting to climb a nearby pine tree. The producer was dragged to the ground and sustained serious injuries, including deep lacerations to his legs and back. It was only after Quintana and Watanabe deployed 2 additional canisters of bear spray that the animal was finally driven off into the forest. In the aftermath, all 9 members of the expedition suffered injuries. Lafleur, Kuznetsov, and Blackwood sustained the most serious wounds and required immediate medical evacuation once emergency responders reached the remote site, approximately 6 hours later. The remaining participants endured various injuries, including deep cuts and fractures, many sustained while fleeing through dense undergrowth. Authorities later concluded that the bear had likely become habituated to human presence, possibly due to previous encounters with improperly stored food by hunters or trekkers. The incident ignited international debate regarding the ethics of producing reality television in dangerous wilderness environments, as well as the adequacy of safety protocols when working in known bear habitats. Following the incident, the survival competition series was canceled mid-season. Network executives cited insurmountable safety concerns as the official reason. After recovering from his injuries, Blackwood faced legal action from several contestants who alleged that the production had deliberately minimized known risks to heighten dramatic tension. Thornfield went on to become a vocal advocate for wildlife safety awareness, founding an organization called Respect Wild Spaces. The initiative focused on educating media crews about responsible practices when operating in remote natural areas. Although the footage of the bear encounter was never made public, it was later used in professional wildlife management training programs to highlight the dangers of human-bear interactions. The event stood as a sobering reminder that in the remote wilderness, humans are merely visitors in a world still ruled by powerful and unpredictable forces of nature. An isolated river in the Kodiak region of Alaska, 2013. Known for its thriving salmon runs and untouched wilderness, the river had long drawn anglers from around the world. Winding through the verdant valleys of the island, its waters had sustained the region's indigenous communities for thousands of years before becoming a renowned destination for sport fishing. The island, often referred to as one of Alaska's natural treasures, was also home to the world's largest subspecies of brown bear, massive creatures with adult males often exceeding 1,500 pounds. Harrison Rutherford, a 42-year-old investment banker from Seattle, had spent years planning his dream fishing trip to Alaska. A seasoned angler with experience in various parts of the American West, he believed himself well prepared for backcountry conditions. However, the rugged Alaskan wilderness would soon reveal just how unprepared he truly was. On the clear morning of September 15th, Rutherford ventured farther downstream than usual, targeting a remote bend in the river recommended by his guide, Emerson Blackwood. The location, known for its exceptional salmon activity, was nearly 3 miles from the nearest outpost, and reachable only via a narrow trail cutting through dense brush. Blackwood had advised caution due to heightened bear activity during the salmon season, but had allowed Rutherford to fish alone after he insisted he was comfortable with the risks. The day began well. Rutherford landed 4 sizable salmon within the first 2 hours. Rather than returning to camp with his catch, he chose to clean the fish on the riverbank, unaware that this decision would have grave consequences. Unlike anglers who clean their catch in moving water to disperse the remains, Rutherford left a trail of blood and entrails on land, creating a potent lure for any nearby predators. Intent on preparing his meal, Rutherford did not notice the bear approaching from downstream. Wildlife officials later estimated the animal's weight at around 1,200 pounds. Drawn by the strong scent of fish remains, the bear silently advanced through the underbrush. It was later determined that Rutherford had been wearing headphones, likely muffling the sound of the animal's approach. Farther upstream, a seasoned guide named Nikolai Petrov, who was instructing 2 clients in fly fishing techniques, spotted the bear first. Realizing the imminent danger, he tried to alert Rutherford by whistling loudly. However, the roar of the river and the distance between them rendered his efforts ineffective. Rutherford only became aware of the bear when it was roughly 20 yards away. According to Petrov's account, Rutherford initially froze, a correct first reaction to a distant bear. But as the bear continued to approach, fear took hold. Rutherford attempted to climb a nearby spruce tree in a desperate bid for safety, a decision that proved disastrous. The bear, interpreting Rutherford's sudden movement as either a threat or the behavior of fleeing prey, charged with startling speed. Before he could climb more than a few feet up the tree, the bear caught his right ankle in its jaws and yanked him to the ground. Its immense power was unmistakable as it hauled the 190-pound man as if he were weightless. The attack that followed was brief but devastating. The bear delivered multiple crushing bites to Rutherford's abdomen and thigh, inflicting deep puncture wounds and severely damaging muscle tissue. From approximately 200 yards away, Petrov observed the attack unfold and immediately retrieved an emergency flare gun from his pack. He fired a flare toward the bear while instructing his clients to stay back. The sudden burst of light and sound startled the animal, causing it to release Rutherford and retreat a short distance. However, the bear quickly turned back toward its target. Petrov fired a second flare, this one passing closer to the bear's face, which finally caused the animal to retreat into the dense underbrush. Trained as a wilderness paramedic, Petrov rushed to Rutherford's side while directing one of his clients, to activate their emergency satellite beacon. Rutherford had lost consciousness from blood loss and shock, his fishing gear soaked with blood from the deep gashes to his lower body. Using supplies from his first aid kit, Petrov applied pressure bandages and administered emergency care that was later credited with saving Rutherford's life. A rescue helicopter arrived approximately 90 minutes later, transporting Rutherford first to a regional hospital and then to a trauma center for specialized treatment. Surgeons worked for over 11 hours to repair the extensive damage to his leg and abdomen. Although his life was saved, Rutherford lost significant muscle function in his right leg and required extensive rehabilitation to regain mobility. Officials from the state's wildlife department investigated the site and found it scattered with fish remains, a clear attractant that one biologist referred to as an open invitation for a bear encounter. The event was later used in public safety campaigns to reinforce proper food handling and cleaning protocols when in bear country. Rutherford later acknowledged that overconfidence and disregard for established safety measures had nearly cost him his life. Through a written statement, he expressed gratitude to Petrov for his life-saving intervention and urged fellow outdoor enthusiasts to treat wilderness safety guidelines with the utmost seriousness. The incident offered a sobering reminder that, while not inherently aggressive toward humans, large bears can become dangerous when they associate people with food. For Rutherford, the lasting physical scars would forever symbolize the power of nature and the respect it commands. The Wind River Range in Wyoming had long been regarded as one of the most breathtaking wilderness regions in the United States, featuring more than 40 peaks over 13,000 feet and a multitude of remote alpine lakes. Stretching over 100 miles, this rugged mountain range attracted an increasing number of backcountry enthusiasts seeking solitude away from the heavily trafficked destinations nearby. While the area was admired for its raw beauty and challenging terrain, the growing presence of grizzly bears posed a serious concern for hikers venturing deep into its remote valleys. Percival "Percy" Wellington, a 34-year-old software developer from Portland, had spent months preparing for a solo trek across the range. An experienced backpacker with several multi-day excursions under his belt, he brought along all recommended bear safety gear, including a bear-resistant food container and bear spray. However, he lacked practical experience in grizzly territory, having previously hiked primarily in regions inhabited by black bears. On the fourth day of his week-long journey, Wellington had been making steady progress along a high-altitude trail, covering nearly 15 miles through dramatic scenery. The late September weather was unusually cooperative, with clear skies and mild temperatures. Feeling confident in his abilities, he had begun to let his guard down. That afternoon, he paused near a dramatic overlook with sweeping views of the valley below. Although scenic, the spot presented a safety hazard: limited visibility and few viable escape routes. As he unpacked a snack, he failed to notice clear signs of recent bear activity nearby: scattered rocks, disturbed earth, and fresh scat not far from where he sat. Wellington later recalled first sensing something was wrong when he heard a low, rhythmic huffing sound about 30 yards away. Looking up, he spotted a large grizzly emerging from a dense patch of brush. The animal, estimated by officials to weigh around 600 pounds, appeared initially unaware of Wellington, pawing at the ground for insects or roots. In that moment, Wellington made a critical error. Instead of quietly backing away, he abruptly stood up. The sudden motion startled the bear, which raised its head sharply and briefly stood on its hind legs to assess the situation. Within seconds, it dropped to all fours and charged. Wellington, panicking, hurled his aluminum trekking poles at the animal in a desperate attempt to create a distraction. That impulsive act likely saved his life. The clatter momentarily confused the bear, giving Wellington just enough time to dive into a narrow crevice between two large boulders near the cliff edge. Too large to enter the tight space, the grizzly became increasingly agitated, swiping at the rocks and attempting to dig into the gap with its claws. Trapped and nearly immobile, Wellington managed to access the bear spray canister clipped to his belt. As the bear lunged forward, he discharged the spray directly into its face at point-blank range. The effect of the bear spray was immediate, though not entirely effective. The bear recoiled, clearly distressed by the burning in its eyes and nasal passages, but it did not retreat from the area as Wellington had hoped. Instead, it began pacing around the cluster of boulders, occasionally swiping into the crevice with its claws in an attempt to reach him. For nearly 45 minutes, Wellington remained trapped, watching the bear's shadow pass back and forth across the ground and listening to its deep huffing and low growls. Eventually, the bear's interest began to fade. It moved a short distance away and began rubbing its face against a tree. trying to soothe the irritation. Recognizing his chance, Wellington cautiously began extracting himself from the tight space, careful not to make any sudden movements. Despite the pain from his injuries, he backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on the bear and maintaining a calm, deliberate pace. After what Wellington would later describe as the longest 15 minutes of his life, he succeeded in putting a safe distance between himself and the bear. Only then did he stop to assess the extent of his injuries. Deep claw marks across his right shoulder, numerous abrasions and bruises from diving into the rocks, and a sprained ankle sustained during the frantic scramble for cover. Despite his condition, Wellington was still more than 6 miles from the nearest trailhead. With no other option, he began the grueling hike back, making steady progress over the next 5 hours as dusk settled over the mountains. Upon reaching his vehicle, he drove to the nearest medical facility in a nearby town, where he received 23 stitches and additional treatment for his wounds. Officials from the state's wildlife department investigated the site the following day. Their findings corroborated Wellington's account, with clear evidence of the struggle near the rocks and bear tracks surrounding the area. Investigators concluded that the encounter had been a defensive response, a startled animal reacting to an unexpected human presence at close range. No action was taken against the bear, as its behavior was consistent with normal protective instincts. The incident left a lasting impression on Wellington. In later interviews with outdoor publications, he emphasized the importance of situational awareness and preparedness in bear habitat. He began advocating for wilderness safety education, occasionally sharing his experience at events focused on backcountry gear and survival training. The following year, Wellington returned to the same mountain range, this time accompanied by 2 experienced partners, and with a renewed respect for the dangers of remote wilderness travel. He later remarked that the slightest sound of rustling brush now drew his immediate attention, a sharpened instinct that reflected the lessons learned from one of the most harrowing encounters of his life. Uganik Bay, Kodiak Island, Alaska, 1997. Kodiak Island had long been known as the domain of the world's largest bears. The Alutiiq people had shared the island with these giants for millennia, developing a rich spiritual relationship with the animals they called takukaak. When Russian fur traders arrived in the 18th century, stories of enormous bears soon spread throughout Europe, drawing hunters and naturalists eager to witness these magnificent predators firsthand. By the late 20th century, Kodiak had become a premier destination for trophy bear hunting, with seasoned guides commanding high fees for their expertise navigating the island's rugged terrain. Bartholomew Bart Hendrickson had been one of those guides. At 52 years old, he was widely regarded as one of the most experienced on the island, with a spotless safety record and a deep understanding of bear behavior. A Wisconsin native and Vietnam veteran, Hendrickson had come to Alaska in search of solitude and purpose. Over the course of 2 decades, he had earned a reputation for leading ethical hunts and instilling in his clients a sense of reverence for the bears they pursued. On the morning of October 11th, Hendrickson was guiding 2 clients, Maxwell Rothschild, a Wall Street executive, and Dr. Sebastian Thornberry, a British surgeon, along the rocky coastline of Uganik Bay on the island's western shore. The group had been hunting for 4 days with limited success. Unseasonably warm weather had altered the bears' usual behavior, keeping them higher in the hills or feeding at unusual hours. That morning, a thick fog had drifted in from the Gulf of Alaska, reducing visibility to less than 30 yards and muffling the sounds of the coastal landscape. Hendrickson, aware of the increased risk posed by such conditions, had taken extra precautions. He moved slowly, often stopping to observe and listen for any signs of nearby bears. The shoreline was strewn with massive driftwood logs and jagged rock formations, creating numerous blind spots, ideal hiding places for a bear foraging on beached marine life exposed by the low tide. According to Rothschild's later statement, Hendrickson had just finished instructing them on how to safely cross the slick, kelp-covered rocks when the incident occurred. The guide had moved a short distance ahead to scout around a large pile of driftwood when a massive Kodiak bear appeared from behind the obstruction. Based on tracks measured later by Alaska Fish and Wildlife officers, the bear was one of the largest recorded in the region, with a front paw print nearly 12 inches wide, indicating a mature male that may have weighed over 1,400 pounds. The bear, likely startled by the sudden appearance of humans at such close range, responded with immediate aggression. It charged with shocking speed, giving Hendrickson no time to unsling his rifle or reach the bear spray canister on his belt. The animal struck him with full force, knocking him to the ground. Rothschild and Thornberry, who had remained about 15 yards behind their guide, stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by the sheer speed and violence of the attack. Recovering his composure, Rothschild raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to frighten the bear away from Hendrickson. The shot echoed across the bay but had little effect. The bear continued its assault, inflicting catastrophic injuries to Hendrickson's torso and neck. Thornberry, remarkably composed given the circumstances, chambered a round in his own rifle and fired a second warning shot. The bear paused briefly, looking up from its victim toward the two hunters, before returning its attention to Hendrickson. It was only after Rothschild fired a third shot, this one striking a rock near the bear's head and sending stone fragments flying, that the animal finally retreated, vanishing into the fog-shrouded undergrowth as swiftly as it had appeared. Rushing to their guide's side, both men immediately recognized the severity of Hendrickson's wounds. Drawing on his medical training, Thornberry attempted to control the bleeding from multiple deep lacerations, while Rothschild used their satellite phone to call for emergency assistance. Despite their best efforts, Hendrickson's injuries proved fatal. He died in Thornberry's arms before the Coast Guard helicopter could arrive, having lost too much blood from a severed femoral artery. The subsequent investigation concluded that the bear had likely been approaching a seal carcass, washed ashore behind the driftwood pile. Officials theorized that the thick fog had prevented both Hendrickson and the bear from detecting each other until they were dangerously close. Tracks indicated that the bear had been moving parallel to the hunter's path, using the driftwood as cover as it neared the carcass. What made the encounter particularly unusual was the bear's persistence. Kodiak bears, while potentially aggressive when surprised, typically retreat once the perceived threat has passed. This bear's refusal to disengage suggested a possible history of prior negative interactions with humans, or strong territorial behavior over a food source that investigators never located. Following Hendrickson's death, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game revised safety protocols for bear guides operating in low-visibility conditions. Among the new rules was a requirement for two-person teams during the periods of heavy fog. A memorial plaque was later installed at the Kodiak Airport, honoring Hendrickson's decades of service to conservation and ethical hunting. For Rothschild and Thornberry, the tragedy forged an unlikely bond. In the months that followed, they established a conservation fund in Hendrickson's name, dedicated to supporting bear research and public safety education. Thornberry, deeply affected by the experience, never hunted again. Rothschild, however, returned to Kodiak 5 years later, guided by Hendrickson's former apprentice, to complete the expedition that had ended so tragically in the mist of Uganik Bay. The incident stood as a solemn reminder that on Kodiak Island, humans remain guests in a land ruled by giants. It was a truth that Bartholomew Hendrickson had understood better than most, and respected until his final day. A remote park in Montana, 2016. Known as one of the crown jewels of the American wilderness, the park spanned over 1 million acres of pristine forests, alpine meadows, and rugged mountains straddling the Continental Divide. Established in 1910, it had undergone a dramatic ecological recovery over the decades, including the resurgence of its apex predator, the grizzly bear. By 2016, an estimated 300 grizzlies roamed its vast expanse, a symbol of conservation success, but also a growing challenge for wildlife managers striving to balance public access with animal protection. One of the park's most popular hiking routes, the Highline Trail, offered stunning views of glacier-carved terrain while weaving through prime grizzly habitat, an overlap that sometimes led to dangerous confrontations. Malcolm Thatcher, a 41-year-old environmental attorney from Minneapolis, had been preparing for a solo hike through the park for nearly a year. He had completed the required online bear safety course and purchased bear spray as advised, feeling reasonably prepared for backcountry travel. However, what he lacked was real-world experience with grizzly bears, something that nearly cost him his life on the morning of August 17th. Thatcher began his hike at a popular trailhead just after sunrise, aiming to complete the 11-mile trek before the region's usual afternoon thunderstorms. Golden morning light bathed the mountainsides, and wildflowers blanketed the subalpine meadows. As he made his way along the trail, he maintained a steady pace and followed safety protocols by making noise at regular intervals to avoid surprising wildlife. Roughly 3 miles into his journey, the trail curved around a steep hillside dense with huckleberry bushes. It was there he spotted a grizzly bear approximately 50 yards ahead. The bear, later identified by biologists as an adult female, was foraging quietly, unaware of the approaching hiker. According to Thatcher's later report, he made a crucial misjudgment. Instead of retreating to allow the bear more space, he chose to continue forward, believing he could pass without causing alarm. Park rangers would later characterize this choice as overly confident and reflective of a common misconception that wild animals would naturally avoid close encounters with humans. As he advanced, maintaining what he thought was a safe buffer of about 30 yards, the bear suddenly became aware of him. It raised its head and fixed its gaze in his direction. The moment was brief, but unmistakable, an ancient instinctual awareness between two species not meant to meet at close range. Before he could follow the recommended steps for a slow retreat, the grizzly charged. The sheer speed of the attack overwhelmed him. Though he had read that grizzlies could reach speeds over 30 miles per hour, the raw force and momentum caught him completely off guard. He attempted to reach for his bear spray, but the animal was already upon him. With a swipe of its powerful front paw, it knocked him violently to the ground. Thatcher found himself pinned beneath the 400-pound predator, its massive weight compressing his chest and making it difficult to breathe. The bear's hot breath surged across his face as it huffed and growled, agitated but not immediately biting. Wildlife experts would later suggest this behavior aligned more with a defensive response than a predatory one. Fighting through waves of terror, Thatcher recalled the counterintuitive advice from his safety training: remain still and play dead during a defensive encounter. Forcing himself to go limp beneath the animal, he concentrated on slowing his breathing and resisting the primal urge to struggle. The grizzly, seemingly uncertain about the lack of resistance, continued to hold him down. Its claws raked across his chest as it shifted its weight, shredding fabric and tearing into skin. Then, in a moment that would remain seared in his memory, the bear lowered its head and delivered a single, forceful bite that cut across his left cheek, missing his eye by mere centimeters. Realizing the situation could escalate further, Thatcher acted out of desperation. Despite the violence of the attack, he had managed to retain his grip on one of his trekking poles. In a final bid for survival, he thrust the pole upward, jabbing the bear in the throat, a vulnerable spot. The strike startled the animal, causing it to rear back just enough for Thatcher to reach the canister of bear spray clipped to his belt. With unsteady hands, he deployed the spray directly into the grizzly's face. The response was immediate. The bear recoiled, shaking its massive head in visible distress as the burning compound overwhelmed its senses. Though it did not flee outright, the animal backed away and began rubbing its eyes and snout against the ground and surrounding plants, trying to escape the searing irritation. Thatcher took the opportunity to slowly crawl toward a nearby outcropping of rock, keeping his eyes fixed on the bear. The grizzly, still reacting to the spray, made no attempt to follow. Reaching the relative safety of the rocks, he took stock of his condition. Multiple lacerations across his chest and face, possible broken ribs, and extensive bruising from the impact of the initial strike. For nearly 30 minutes, he remained concealed among the rocks, watching the bear slowly recover and eventually wander back toward the huckleberry thicket. It appeared to have lost interest in him entirely. Only when it disappeared from sight did Thatcher begin the painful 3-mile trek back to the trailhead, his pace slow and cautious, each step accompanied by spikes of pain and the ever-present fear of another encounter. Upon reaching the visitor center, he collapsed from exhaustion and trauma. Rangers quickly administered first aid and transported him to a nearby medical facility, where doctors treated his injuries with more than 40 stitches and confirmed 3 cracked ribs. The incident prompted authorities to temporarily close a section of the trail, while wildlife staff conducted a thorough investigation. After analyzing Thatcher's account and evaluating the scene, officials concluded that the grizzly had responded in a typical defensive manner after being startled at close range. No action was taken against the animal, which continued to be monitored as part of the park's ongoing wildlife research program. For Malcolm Thatcher, the experience marked a turning point in his relationship with wilderness travel. In later interviews with outdoor publications, he stressed the difference between carrying bear spray and truly understanding how and when to use it. Motivated by his experience, he began advocating for improved wilderness training, eventually developing a hands-on safety course that included realistic simulations of wildlife encounters. When asked whether he would ever return to the park, he expressed a firm intention to do so, but only with a deeper respect for the land and its inhabitants. His response captured the lasting impact of the experience. While the mountains would remain unchanged, he would move through them with a renewed sense of humility. A remote airstrip in the Alaskan interior, 2011. The rough-hewn landing strips scattered across Alaska's vast wilderness had long served as lifelines for communities disconnected from the state's limited road system. These utilitarian runways, often little more than gravel clearings, provided essential access for mail delivery, medical evacuations, and supply flights to isolated cabins and settlements. One such airstrip, located along a historic sled dog trail northwest of Anchorage, had supported bush plane traffic since the 1930s. The surrounding terrain, dominated by dense spruce forest, winding rivers, and broad wetlands, was home to abundant wildlife, including thriving populations of moose, wolves, and black bears. Zachariah Zach Obermeyer and Finnegan McAllister, both seasoned bush pilots working for a regional air service, had flown into the airstrip dozens of times over their careers. Obermeyer, 37, had accumulated more than 12,000 flight hours after relocating from Colorado 15 years earlier. McAllister, 42, was a third-generation Alaskan pilot, part of a family that had helped pioneer aviation routes through the state's formidable mountain passes. Between them, they had faced nearly every challenge the Alaskan backcountry could deliver, from sudden whiteout conditions to mechanical failures in temperatures that rendered hydraulic systems inoperable. But neither expected the unusual confrontation awaiting them on the afternoon of May 23rd. That morning, the two men had delivered medical supplies and mail to a small group of year-round residents operating a seasonal roadhouse, catering to sled dog teams and summer visitors. After a brief lunch at the lodge, they returned to the airstrip to prepare for the flight back to Anchorage. The weather was unseasonably warm, with temperatures climbing into the mid-60s, an early harbinger of the mosquito season, which both men noted with mild irritation as they conducted pre-flight checks. According to their later report to state wildlife authorities, Obermeyer had been inspecting the engine while McAllister secured the cargo when they noticed movement at the tree line about 50 yards away. Expecting perhaps one of the locals, they were surprised when a medium-sized black bear emerged from the forest. While bear sightings were a routine part of life in Alaska, it was uncommon for one to approach an area recently occupied by people. The bear, estimated at around 250 pounds, moved directly toward the aircraft with its head raised, sampling the air. Wildlife officials later concluded that the animal was likely drawn by a mix of aviation fuel fumes and the lingering scent of the pilot's lunch, which had included salmon sandwiches, an irresistible lure for bears newly emerged from winter torpor. Initially, the pilots attempted standard deterrence. They waved their arms and shouted while maintaining a safe distance, hoping the bear would lose interest. When this proved ineffective, McAllister started their service vehicle. A well-worn pickup kept on site, hoping the noise would startle the bear into retreat. But the animal showed no sign of concern, continuing its focused approach. As the situation grew more concerning, Obermeyer retrieved an air horn from the plane's emergency kit and activated it when the bear closed to about 30 yards. The sudden blast gave the bear pause but failed to drive it off. Instead, the animal veered slightly and began inspecting several barrels of aviation fuel stored near a maintenance shed. The bear's attention to the fuel supply was deeply troubling. Both men knew the potential hazard posed by a bear damaging the containers, whether through puncture or accidental ignition. When the bear began pushing the barrels with its snout, McAllister drove the truck toward the animal in a last-ditch effort to chase it away from the area. The maneuver had unintended consequences. Rather than retreat, the bear abruptly turned and charged the tail section of the aircraft, possibly reacting to the noise or perceiving the plane as a rival for food. Obermeyer, who had been standing near the wing, scrambled into the cockpit as the bear circled the aircraft, rising on its hind legs and swatting at the stabilizers. With the animal growing more aggressive, Obermeyer recalled the emergency flare gun stored in their survival kit, while McAllister kept his distance in the vehicle, occasionally honking the horn in another attempt to divert the bear. Obermeyer steadied his nerves and loaded the flare gun, hands trembling only slightly despite the rush of adrenaline. When the bear momentarily wandered away from the aircraft to investigate something on the ground, Obermeyer took advantage of the brief window. Leaning out of the cockpit window, he aimed the flare gun upward and fired. The bright red flare shot into the sky with a sharp hiss, exploding in a cascade of sparks that finally captured the bear's full attention. The unexpected display succeeded where earlier deterrence had failed. The startled animal froze, staring up at the fading sparks before abruptly turning and retreating toward the tree line at a surprisingly quick pace. Wasting no time, both pilots completed an abbreviated set of pre-flight checks and started the engine. Within minutes, they were rolling down the uneven airstrip and lifting into the clear Alaskan sky, both men casting cautious glances at the forest below as they gained altitude. During their radio contact with flight service, they relayed a warning to other pilots planning to use the same airstrip, advising heightened caution due to the recent wildlife encounter. Upon landing back in Anchorage, Obermeyer and McAllister submitted formal reports to their company and the state's Wildlife Management Agency. Wildlife officers were dispatched to investigate the scene, where they found fresh tracks matching the pilot's description and confirmed signs that the bear had been attracted by both the aviation fuel barrels and lingering food odors near the aircraft. As a precaution, officials installed motion-activated noise deterrents at the site and provided updated bear safety training to staff operating in the area. The incident also prompted the Air Service Company to reassess its procedures, particularly regarding food storage in aircraft and backcountry bear awareness for pilots operating in remote locations. For Obermeyer and McAllister, the incident became a frequent topic of conversation among fellow bush pilots, often introduced with a dry observation about how bear encounters had never been part of their flight school curriculum. Beneath the humor, however, was a shared recognition of how narrowly they had avoided a serious situation. Damage to the aircraft or fuel system could have left them stranded in increasingly hazardous conditions. The event served as a stark reminder that in Alaska's wilderness, the boundary between the human world and untamed nature is always fragile. Those who travel there do so on nature's terms, and with no guarantee that the next encounter will unfold as safely.